Jim, let's stop at the diner in. Oh my God. Hank's scream came over the radio milliseconds after the largest bolt of lightning I've ever seen cross the road and struck a trailer full of disabled horses on the opposite side of the divided highway. The flash nearly blinded me. If my mother had been with me in the cab of the truck, she would have made the sign of the cross and prayed to St. Jude for all the horses, people, and other living creatures in that trailer. I just let out a long whistle and continued driving at 65 miles per hour. I was hauling a large load across the Cascades, a long rotor blade for a wind farm. Don't ask me about the pros and cons of putting a big fan on top of a mountain. I understand both sides have their arguments, but I just deliver the load and get paid like I do for any load on the trailer behind my cab. Hank, the lead driver, you've seen those guys. They usually drive a compact car with a rotating flasher and a big Oversused sign on the top. So Hank needed another cup of coffee, 10 miles east of Vantigay. There is a small cafe with a truck stop, and it is there that Hank finally gets off the highway. I decided I needed something to eat. It took 4 hours to get out of the dock in Tacoma and through traffic on the west side, so I was hungry. I parked the car and walked through the door. It was impossible not to notice her. She was the most beautiful woman in the room. Okay, that's not all, because there was only one other woman in the cafe, and she weighed at least 190 pounds, dressed in a uniform jacket. Very stylish. I took a seat at the counter and watched the waitress as she finished taking her order. From the rude booth in the corner, I kept my eyes on this beauty as she placed my order on the chef's turntable and turned to take my order. From the look in her eyes when she recognized me, it was hard to tell. Was it shock, humor, irritation, or a combination of all three? Well, Jim, of all the eateries in the world, damn, how could she remember? It was one of Bogey's famous lines from Casablanca. Humphrey Bogart can't believe his ex-lover walked into his bar in Morocco with another man. When we got married, I took Nancy to see Casablanca at the theater. What brings you here? Coffee and a Denver omelet, Nancy. I will bring it now. She turned and placed the order on the turntable. At that moment, Hank came out of the bathroom. He looked at Nancy for a second and sat down next to me. Isn't that her? Who is this? How would you know? You've never met her. I saw the photographs on your visor when I gave you the magazine. It's hard not to notice such beauty. Who is she? My ex, and the biggest mistake of my life. The mistake was not that I married this sweet lady, but that I let her go. To help you understand how my love life went to shit and why I'm still courting and carrying around pictures of the woman who left me 5 years ago, I need to go back in time to high school. It was there that my life first went off the rails. Jocelyn Murphy had the most beautiful face and the sweetest smile of all the girls in school. She had about 9 extra pounds on her, but at least 2 of them were located in each of her breasts. Early in my senior year, I plucked up the courage to ask Jocelyn on a date. We hit it off and were inseparable for the rest of the school year. Jocelyn took my virginity sometime before Thanksgiving. I have no doubt she lost it much earlier, but I never asked about it. Given the combination of circumstances, a very sexy girl, a moderately handsome guy, I decided that I had hit the jackpot and turned out to be one of those guys we all called henpecked, and so it was. But I was an 18-year-old guy who got sex regularly, so why should I care? At the same time, one of my teammates, Spencer Crasser, was the least spanked guy I knew or ever knew. Spencer was a good athlete playing on the football and basketball teams, but he was not a star. He also didn't look physically impressive, maybe almost 6 feet tall and about 160 pounds, but this guy was dating the sexiest girl in school. Not only did Spencer date Debbie Drake, but he treated her like crap. He didn't hit her or anything, but the emotional abuse was disgusting. We both graduated from school in June. I went to Diesel Technology School in the fall and worked in a lubricant warehouse. Jocelyn's grades weren't good enough to get into any 4-year colleges, and she worked at a clothing store in a mall. We continued to exclusively date, make love, and plan our future together. And then everything went to hell. Jocelyn's parents, thanks to her father's connections, got Jocelyn accepted on probation to a state college in the South, 300 miles from home. Did they do this because they wanted her to get an education or to keep her away from me? I never found out. Jocelyn left in January for the spring semester. For the next 5 months, I remained faithful to Jocelyn. I wrote her letters, called her every couple of days, and visited her twice. The first time we made love, but something was wrong. Her reaction to my efforts lacked the same intensity. We lay on her bed after making love for the first time since January. You didn't have time? No, but this doesn't happen every time we make love, and it will probably take us some time to regain synchronicity after a long absence from each other. Don't overreact, Jim. Let's just go to bed. The next evening, after a pretty decent day together, I redoubled my efforts. I left in the morning feeling confident. 5 weeks later, I went to see her, but unfortunately, she stated that her monthly friend was visiting, so a few kisses and a quick groping was all I managed before leaving on Sunday afternoon. Jocelyn didn't come home for spring break. She said she was too busy studying. Jocelyn kept me on my toes. Her infrequent letters always ended with the words, "Love, Jocelyn," and she never hung up on me without telling me she loved me. Jocelyn had to come home for Memorial Day weekend. School was out and Jocelyn had failed probation. I was ready to welcome her home. In my pocket was the ring she had chosen for the previous Christmas. I called her and asked if I could come the first day she was home. "Yes, come, Jim. We need to talk." I was such a naive puppy back then. Yes, of course we need it, I thought, and got into my pickup truck and headed towards her house with a smile on my face. When she opened the door, an older guy was talking to her parents. Jocelyn left the house and closed the door behind her. I tried to kiss her, and she turned her head so much that we kissed on the cheeks like an airy French kiss. I was shocked. The damn ring box fell out of my hands and hit the pavement as she pulled away. I quickly picked it up, but not before she saw it. "Jim, I'm pregnant." My first thought was, didn't the condom work? My second thought was, when was the last time we were together? And what came out of my mouth? "How far along in your pregnancy are you?" 2 months. Well, that answered all 3 of my questions. But I thought of one more thing. With this guy in there? Jocelyn had the decency to at least shed a few tears as she answered. "I'm so sorry, Jim." "Me too. Good luck, Jocelyn. I hope he treats you as well as I did." "That's not what I meant. I knew that no one would treat her as well as I did. And someday in the future, my words would haunt her. Apparently, I'm not always a good guy. She got married and returned to the South with that guy. It turned out that he was her tutor at the university. I never saw Jocelyn after that day, but mutual friends told me that she became very bloated during the 2nd and 3rd trimesters of pregnancy and continued to gain weight after giving birth. They divorced 3 years later, and Jocelyn returned home to her parents. Thinking back on how it all came together, I can't help but hum the Garth Brooks song, Unanswered Prayers, in which Garth sings about meeting his old flame and realizing he dodged a bullet a little over a year later. On my 21st birthday, my friends took me out to a restaurant to celebrate my official transition into adulthood, and what better way to celebrate than crashing into the boilers and spending an hour on my knees praying to a porcelain god. I remained conscious long enough to meet Cecilia and sleep with her that night. I can't say what happened, but whatever happened must have satisfied Cecilia because the next morning she was still in my bed. Either that was it or she was too drunk to leave. Cecilia never left, and within a week she had moved all her worldly belongings, which consisted of 1 box and 2 suitcases, into my apartment. What was it about Cecilia that made me lose all perspective and logical thinking? Of course, sex, anything, almost anything that 2 people could do, we did. Cecilia had a body and face that could melt your heart. I was completely smitten and completely out of my element. I began to lose friends, and my relationship with my mother deteriorated greatly during the 2 years that Cecilia and I were together. I defended her to anyone who even suggested that we were moving too fast, or that I should look into her past. I was in love, damn it, and no one could tell me otherwise. We got married within a year. The sex never stopped, and I repaid Cecilia by treating her like a queen. She didn't have to work if dinner was ready when I got home from work, even though half the time it was takeout or piece of delivery. The house wasn't exactly a dump, but it wasn't exactly neat either. What did Cecilia do while I was away at work all day? TV, reading celebrity magazines, working out at the gym, and most likely one other activity that I didn't find out about until months later. All but the last could be forgiven, especially since at least 2 days a week I came home and found Cecilia naked. After a week, she started dropping hints. "Have you ever thought about exchanging with another couple?" I did not understand the hints, and after a few more days, she became more frank. What are your fantasies, Jim? Have you ever thought about doing this with two women? Have you ever been turned on by the thought of sharing me with another man? I told Cecilia that none of this attracted me. She is my fantasy, and I am, to paraphrase Maslow, completely self-actualized. Cecilia responded by refusing sex for days or even weeks. I responded by bringing flowers home, asking her out more often, and buying her lingerie or sexy outfits. In response, Cecilia began to have more hen parties, and I began to do more housework, so as not to turn our life into a pigsty. One evening, instead of returning home to an empty apartment, when Cecilia was having a bachelorette party, I went to my mother's. She's cheating on you, Jim. I don't know that, Mom. We're just going through a difficult time right now, and she says she needs to be with her friends. Get your head out of your ass, son. My mother had never spoken to me like that, and I was shocked. Mom got up from her chair, took the phone book, and called. I only heard my mother's version of the conversation. Is Fred Thompson there? Can I talk to him? A short pause then. Fred, this is Helen. Is Cecilia there? Yes, and is she acting the same as last time? Okay, I'm heading there with Jim. We'll be outside. While we were driving to the Lucky 7 bar on the other side of town, my mother brought me up to date. Your Uncle Fred saw Cecilia twice at the bar where he hangs out. She must not remember how she met him at your wedding. He told me that she dances with almost any guy who asks, and he has seen her go out with some of the guys on more than one occasion. Why didn't you say anything? Because you made it clear to me that I should stay away. I was hoping you would figure it out on your own without me being the bearer of bad news. But today you left me no choice. I can't see my boy suffer. It will hurt, but maybe everything will be okay in the end. You can handle that bitch, Jocelyn. You can handle Cecilia. Mom made it sound like it was the end of my marriage, but I wasn't so sure. Could I get over Cecilia being danced and possibly kissed by another man? I had to see to find out. We parked in the lot across the street and waited. It didn't take long. Half an hour later, Cecilia left the bar with two men. In the back of my mind, I hoped she was just going out for some fresh air or a smoke. But that was not the case. The three of them approached a large SUV, and Cecilia climbed into the back seat of one of the men while the second stood outside and lit a cigarette. It was a clear night, and the bar's parking lot was lit. Mom didn't take her eyes off me as Cecilia's head disappeared from our sight. 10 minutes later, her head reappeared, and the second guy climbed into the back seat. The first guy just moved. Even a simpleton like me understood what had happened, but my mother and I went to the other side of the street to make sure of it. Looking out the window, I saw that Cecilia's dress had ridden up and her breasts were swaying. She was wearing the red dress I bought her for our first anniversary. Mom came ready and was not confused, and I just started. She took out a camera and took several pictures of my wife in all her beauty. At that moment, the first guy saw us through the window and shouted, "What the hell?" Cecilia opened her eyes and looked down the street, then opened her mouth to scream. Jim, wait." Mom pulled me back to our car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw Cecilia jump out of the SUV. Her top was still there, but the bottom of her dress was still hiked up at her waist, and she was naked from the waist down. Uncle Fred gave me the name of a great divorce lawyer. She came highly recommended because she represented my uncle's first wife, and he was completely screwed. The lawyer took on my case after looking at the photographs taken by my mother. There weren't many assets, and the judge agreed with my lawyer that Cecilia was able to work. So I only had to pay child support for 3 months until the divorce became final. After the judge made the decision, Cecilia stopped me outside the courtroom and tried to get me to change my decision. Jim, isn't there something I can say or do to make you change your mind? I tried to follow the right path. I was happy that my mother and Uncle Fred supported me when it was necessary. Their voices rang in my head as I answered Cecilia quietly so that no one in the corridor would hear our private affairs. It's okay. See, I could never kiss those lips without thinking about how they kissed some asshole before, and the thought of getting close to you in bed makes me sick. My words turned on a switch in Cecilia's lizard brain. You stupid shit. Do you have any idea how many times in the last year you've kissed me after another? Did you really think that you were the only guy I had sex with? All the time we were married, you got seconds. I started to feel sick, and both of our lawyers stood there with wide eyes, watching Cecilia take out her anger. Suddenly, this moment was interrupted by a sharp voice coming from behind Cecilia. The judge was standing in the corridor. "You four, go to my chambers, immediately." My lawyer said this was the first time she had witnessed what happened next. The judge reversed her decision and canceled Cecilia's alimony. Plus, Cecilia had to pay my lawyer's fees from the half she received from our estate. Justice may be blind, but he has excellent hearing. I probably should have seen a therapist after the divorce. I was a loser twice. I treated Jocelyn and Cecilia like queens and was abandoned twice because of my problems. I was clearly doing something wrong. I was living and working in Tacoma when I happened to walk into a new diner near work. I watched her for the entire half hour while I ate my lunch. Depending on whether she was carrying a tray or not, she alternated between gliding around the diner with a full tray of dishes high above her head and almost skipping when her hands were empty. Either way, there was a grace to her movements like watching a Ginger Rogers movie. I checked her left hand for a ring and was pleased to find it empty. Her badge said Nancy. The diner became a regular stop for me. From time to time, I would sit at her table and take the opportunity to chat. I tipped well without being pushy. She seemed to accept my friendliness, and one day I took a chance. "Can I buy you a cup of coffee sometime?" She laughed, but it wasn't a cruel laugh. "Are you asking a girl who works at a diner all day for a cup of coffee?" I almost blushed. "Okay, maybe not coffee. Anything. Drinks, dinner, cinema. Name it yourself. Can you handle a chick flick? I want to watch the new movie with Drew Barrymore. Fever. Only if you agree to watch the new Batman movie with me when it comes out next month." She didn't even doubt her answer. "Do you mean the film with Christian Bale? He's cute. It's a date." After 2 weeks, we became exclusive, and after 3, we became lovers. Nancy was sweet and sassy, with a smile shining from her eyes and spreading all over her face. I took her fishing in Puget Sound and was shocked when she caught 15 pounds of sockeye salmon. She took it straight to my net, and without my help. She pulled it out and threw it in the refrigerator. We hiked in Mount Rainier National Park and stayed overnight in a small tent. In the morning, she surprised me by swimming naked in a small mountain stream. I was falling in love. One afternoon, I went to see my mother. I hadn't seen her since Nancy came into my life, and it was already serious. Mom's brother sat at the kitchen table while Mom made us cheese sandwiches and poured 2 bowls of her bean soup. After talking about her feelings for Nancy and asking when it would be convenient to invite her to meet her, Mom looked at Uncle Fred. "Well, here we go again. Mom, I think this is completely different. You'll see when you get to know her. You'll see. Your Uncle Fred and Aunt Lena will be having dinner here next Sunday. Why don't you take her there?" Dinner on Sunday exceeded all expectations. Before dinner was over, Mom and Aunt Lena were telling Nancy family recipes, as well as secrets that weren't written down on the recipe cards. Nancy spent an hour with Uncle Fred, exchanging fishing stories. The king that Uncle Fred had caught in Alaska last year now weighed up to 23 kilograms and was longer than his arm span. After that, Nancy let him win. That evening, we were already returning home when I asked, "Well, when will I meet your grower?" They both died. "Oh my God, Nancy, I'm so sorry. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Until today, none of us said anything about relatives. Besides, it's been 5 years and I still miss them. So I tried to stay away from the topic. This was new territory for me, and I didn't know what to say, but I decided to ask, is it possible to find out how they died?" "Drunken stone driver. He crossed the center line on Highway 18. Dad died instantly, but Mom lived for a few weeks. It was terrible, but I was the one who had to make the decision to let her go. What kind of child should make the decision to turn off the machine that keeps their parents alive?" Nancy began to cry. "I'm sorry, but that explains your aversion to drinking and driving. I always thought you were going a little overboard, but now I understand why this is so important to you. While my mother was in the hospital, I dropped out of school, and after her death, I could not afford to return. Then I started working as a waitress. Lips are okay, but at the end of the month, there is not much left, so school is put off. Your father didn't have life insurance, or you couldn't get anything from the other driver's insurance. No, the other driver had no insurance, and because my mom lived 3 weeks after my Dad died, she got all of his life insurance, which ended up paying only her medical bills. After everything was completed, I had less than $10,000 left, which basically paid off the bills that had accumulated while I was in the hospital with my mother. That's one of the crazy things about how our system works. It's like a lottery. If a UPS truck or a government vehicle killed my family, I'd be a multimillionaire. But some drunk drug addict with no insurance destroys my family, and I'm broke. I'm not saying that I would like to get rich at the expense of losing my family. I would trade everything I have just to talk to my mom and dad just once. To sit at our dinner table just once. They were truly wonderful, loving people. You would like them, and I think they would like you too. We pulled up to her apartment when she finished, tears streaming down her cheeks. I walked her to the door. She took my hand and led me inside. That night we slept in her bed, not making love. She just pressed herself against my chest with her arm around my shoulders. I fell more and more in love with this woman. 6 months after our first date, Nancy and I got engaged. It was a short engagement, and within a month we eloped to Las Vegas. Mom was upset that she wouldn't be at our wedding, but she was glad that I had found such a wonderful woman. For the first 6 months of our marriage, everything was great. We made love almost every night. Both of our jobs were going swimmingly. Nancy was still working as a waitress, and I was still working as a diesel mechanic at a local Dodge dealership. She was only working on Cummins engines for big Dodge trucks. Then the dealership closed, and along with it, of course, my job. Without wasting any time, I visited every store and dealer within a 60-mile radius, trying to find another job. Nancy was so sweet and did everything she could to keep my spirits up when I started to lose hope. She took on extra shifts every week so our finances wouldn't suffer too much. Finally, after 6 weeks, I got a job at an independent garage out of town. Not a bad commute, but I was only making 3/4 of what I was making at the Dodge dealer. My attitude towards work began to be influenced by our new financial situation, poor. It didn't help that my new boss was a bit of an ass. He was such a nice guy when we discussed the position, but the longer I worked under him, which is how he always put it, the more his comments seemed hard. It was harsh and offensive to me. Several of the other mechanics were friendly, as was the woman who worked the front desk and did the bookkeeping. She seemed nice, but after 3 months of work, it became clear that she and her boss were spending time in the office having sex. I felt sorry for her husband, who stopped by the office every few weeks to deliver flowers to the cheater or invite her to lunch. I almost told the guy he was being scammed. I remember no one told me when Cecilia left until Mom did. But in the end, I decided to mind my own business. I think our marriage was still in good shape, but the constant struggle to pay bills and save money for the future was starting to wear on me. The few arguments we had were always about money. Nancy was usually practical, and I felt like from time to time I needed something new. Our biggest fight began when I told Nancy that I was considering purchasing a new Winchester, Model 70 hunting rifle and loopholed scope. Altogether, it would cost a little over $2,400. Jim, I thought we were saving for a house so I could get pregnant. Nancy, why do I work if from time to time I can't buy myself something? But you bought a new rifle 2 years ago. Why did you need another one so soon? Did I say anything when you needed a sewing machine? Have you received a third specialty? Jim, this sewing machine was used and I paid less than $400 for it. Plus, I've probably already saved half that amount just by sewing some curtains and other things. Nancy was making sense, but I wanted that new rifle. Damn it. Why was she so logical? Oh, aren't you Miss Wonderful? There is no need to repeat our entire argument. Let's just say that we never agreed on the need for a new rifle. And for the first time during our relationship, we went to bed without telling each other. I love you. Okay, I behaved like a brute, but in my defense, I will say that during the entire time we were a couple, I never hit, threatened, screamed, or called Nancy harsh names. But I know that this is small consolation for the fact that I treated a beautiful, loving woman the way I treated her. Even now, years later, I cannot explain what happened to me and why I turned into such an lady. The next evening, returning from work, I went into a tavern. I knew I was wrong and didn't want to continue the argument I started the day before, so I put off the inevitable. As I sat at the bar, sipping a beer and wondering how I could apologize to Nancy, without admitting how wrong I was, a voice came from behind me. Aren't you Jim Peterson? I looked at my reflection in the mirror behind the bar, then turned around. It's you. We attended Central High and graduated together 7 years ago. It was Spencer Crasser, and he looked genuinely happy to see me. I extended my hand to shake. He took it and sat down on the bar stool next to mine. You dated Jocelyn Murphy, right? My God, what a great ass and such tits. Have you seen her lately? She's huge. A guy might get lost trying to have sex with her, but he'll die happy in this valley. I should have been angry that he was talking about the girl I once loved. A gentleman should have said something, but I just let it slide. Let me buy you a beer. Let's drink to all the women we have known and to all the women we have yet to know. Even though Spencer and I never hung out in high school, he seemed to enjoy my company. We drank a few more beers and exchanged life stories. I kept most of my stories quiet, but I did talk about my current relationship with Nancy. I thought I was expressing happiness in my marriage, but I made the mistake of telling Spencer about our current differences. You know what your problem is, don't you, Jim? You're just a whipping boy. You keep treating these women like goddesses, and they keep shitting on you. You need to make sure your woman knows that you are a man. I was skeptical and was about to say something in response when we were interrupted. Prince Honey, there you are. I turned around to see a stunning blonde standing next to Spencer. Spencer had an annoyed look on his face. Mandy, what the hell is wrong with you? I'm sitting here talking to my friend, and you're interrupting me. Go ahead and book us a table. I'll come when I'm done talking to Jim. Order me a beer. After these words, Mandy turned around and sat down at one of the tables. She looked like a pet dog waiting for its owner. I expected Spencer to say something like, "See, this is how it's done." But what surprised me most was that Spencer acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Women simply did what they were told. We finished our beer and I got up to leave. Spencer gave me his business card, told me to call him, and walked up to Mandy. She looked like a dog that had just been given a bone. My beer-stupefied brain was now more puzzled than ever. What did I just witness? Just like in high school, Spencer Crasser treated women with absolutely no respect, and these women are out of his hands. I treated them like ladies and got them in the teeth. Well, Nancy hasn't done it yet, but when will? That shoe drop. Unfortunately, given my state of mind, instead of coming home and apologizing to Nancy for my behavior the night before, I acted like an ass. In response to Nancy's warm greeting, I replied, "What's for dinner?" Nancy cooked a nice dinner, and I ruined it by adding too much salt. I made sure she saw me use the salt shaker twice. After dinner, Nancy cleared the table and washed the dishes while I watched the basketball game. When the game was over, Nancy was lying in bed reading a book. That night, for the first time in our relationship, I had sex with Nancy, and nothing I did could be construed as lovemaking. After that, I rolled over onto my back to go to sleep, ignoring her quiet sobs. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon rolls. It wasn't unusual for Nancy to have breakfast ready, but that morning, I jumped to the wrong conclusion. Maybe Spencer was right? I thought to myself, I won't bore you with all the crap I did over the next 4 months. I started hanging out with Spencer while my marriage continued to crumble. Nancy spent those 4 months remembering the Jim she married. Looking back, she should have told my mother about my behavior, and the two of them should have given me a kick in the ass and in the head. The problem was that no matter how badly I behaved, Nancy kept trying to show me how much she loved me, which only made Spencer's delusions more intense in my head. A week before all hell broke loose, Nancy sat down with me after dinner. "Jim, I love you, but you hurt me. If you don't like it, there's a door over there." I don't think I could have hurt her more by stabbing her in the heart. Nancy burst into tears and ran to our bed. I drank more beer. On Saturday, Nancy had to work all day. I went to a tavern before noon and started drinking with Spencer, Mandy, and some redhead. Spencer clearly had his eye on the redhead, wanting to hook her. Mandy's presence made it awkward, so he pushed Mandy on to me. "How would you like to get a piece of this, Jim boy?" "I'm married." "You're married? But that doesn't mean you can't have fun. Look at this woman's body. Have you ever had a body like this in your life? Did you ever think that you could get such a beautiful ass? Mandy, go over there to Jim." It was apparently a common request, judging by the way Mandy reacted. She sat on my lap, and Spencer just laughed as he grabbed the redhead and pulled her out onto the dance floor. The jukebox was playing some hip-hop, and Spencer and the redhead started putting on a show. Mandy pulled me along and tried her best to overtake the redhead. At some point I had to ask, "Why do you let Spencer tell you what to do? Why are you doing this to me?" Mandy replied, "Because if I don't do this, I'll never see him again. I know that he hangs out with just about anyone, and I probably don't mind fooling around myself. So in this case, everyone will get what they want. Plus, you're quite cute." It didn't make any sense to me, but by this time, I was just looking forward to having sex with her. We continued to dance, then Mandy kissed me, sticking her tongue so far down my throat that she must have been searching for my soul. Then she stopped. "Was that your wife? What are you talking about?" There was some woman with long brown hair dressed in a waitress costume. She stood at the door and looked at us for a minute. She didn't say a word, just looked for a minute, turned and left. I ran out of the bar just in time to see Nancy's car leave the parking lot and speed down the street. Needless to say, she didn't come home the entire weekend and didn't answer my calls. On Monday, I returned home after work to a half-empty apartment, saw her 2 rings and a short note. I found the door. On Friday, I received documents about the dissolution of our marriage. Friday night, I got drunk and punched Spencer Krasser in the nose. I spent Saturday and Sunday in prison. On Monday, I appeared again before the same judge who presided over my divorce from Cecilia. "You look familiar, Mr. Peterson. Have you been to my court before?" "Yes, Your Honor." I reminded her when we met in her court in the past. "Okay, what is this nonsense that you hit Mr. Spencer Krasser on the nose?" I told the judge how and why. "What are you going to do now? Will you create any more problems?" I told the judge about my decision, which I made while sitting in jail over the weekend. 6 months probation. If you do what you say and stay out of trouble, the charges will be dropped and your criminal record expunged. With these words, she hit the hammer. The next day, I fulfilled my promise to the judge and went to the Army recruiting station. This was not a last-minute decision. The recruiter approached me several months ago. The Army needed good diesel mechanics and offered a decent package of services for conscripts. I would never have agreed to this as a married man, but my imbecile actions burned that bridge. With the promise that I would be a mechanic and not have to carry a rifle, I signed on the dotted line. Immediately after camp, where they tried to retrain me to shoot a rifle, but old bad habits die hard, I was sent to Forward Operating Base Sharana in Afghanistan. In the base garage, I was introduced to my new colleagues and a service bay, stocked with a set of tools that I would need for the rest of my service. I spent the first 2 hours cleaning the tool left over from the corporal I was replacing. Someone told me he was neat until the day he was nearly killed by an incoming mortar round. He escaped because a mine fell on the other side of the machine he was working on, causing multiple non-life-threatening injuries and leaving him badly shaken. He never returned. After cleaning up my tools, I started working on my first car, a Humvee. During the 15 months I spent there, I was lucky. I didn't have to shoot anyone, and even better, no one shot at me. Although there were a couple of attempts, all unsuccessful. 99% of my time was spent in the relative safety of the base, but a few times I volunteered to drive one of the big trucks when we needed supplies. It was there that I learned how to truly drive a big truck. I volunteered to drive not because I was a hero, but because it would earn me special favors from senior officers, such as a couple of extra days off. I spent 3 years in the Army, finishing as a master sergeant in the motor vehicle depot at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I received an honorable discharge and went home to Washington State. Not everyone has as positive an experience as I had while serving in the military, but for me, it was the best thing that had happened in my life up to that point. Growing up where I lived, I didn't interact much with men and women of different ethnic or racial backgrounds, maybe a few Jewish kids or Asians, but that's about it. My best friend in Sharon was a black guy from Los Angeles. When his tour ended, we became practically brothers with different mothers. His name was Scotty Johnson, and he did so much for me that I could never thank him enough. One of the things Scotty taught me was boxing. Before being drafted into the Army, Scotty practiced boxing in Los Angeles. When there was little to do on base, we spent time in the gym. There are only so many hours you can spend playing video games and surfing the internet. Everything became boring and Scotty offered to teach me how to box. We ordered gloves, a hat, and a couple of training bags online. The first 2 months were a joke. Scotty was like a cat and a mouse, constantly teasing me with blows, never overdoing it. But after the first 2 months, I began to understand what was happening. I realized that I could take punches, so like Joe Frazier, I would let my opponent take a couple of punches while I worked in close and did some damage. After Scotty left, I did my best to stay in shape, but things weren't the same until I went to a camp with an official amateur boxing team. Boxing on a team reinforces the discipline that boxing requires. It was another step in my growing up. 2 more people who helped me become a man became friends with me during the 6 months that I was in Germany. Sergeant Major Ramon Morales and his wife Kate took me under their wing. They lived off base in Stuttgart with their 2 children and invited me to dinner at least once every 2 weeks. Has there ever been a couple more in love and more respectful of each other? I grew up with a single mother, so I had no idea what a loving relationship between 2 adults looked like. My mother always supported me and was a loving parent, but I never saw her with a man. Ramon and Kate taught me what was missing in my life and how I should have treated Nancy. They came from different backgrounds and grew up in Texas. Kate was a WASP, lived around the corner from Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and attended SMU. Ramon was the son of a working-class Catholic family. They had one thing in common that led to their acquaintance and courtship. Both had ancestors who fought and died alongside Crockett, Bowie, Travis, and other brave men who defended the Alamo. Ramon and Kate met on the Alamo courtyard while they were both honoring their ancestors at the 150th anniversary celebration. They chatted, had dinner on the river embankment, exchanged names and phone numbers. Ramon was very surprised when he called the number, and it was really Kate who answered. He knew that ladies sometimes give fake numbers, and he held his breath until she got in touch. 21 years later, I was sitting at their dining room table in Stuttgart, learning how to have a good marriage and wondering if I would ever be lucky enough to meet another girl as sweet as Nancy. I realized that it's not just about gifts and fulfilling another person's wishes, but also about respect. And the respect the Moraleses showed wasn't just between husband and wife. Both children treated each other and their parents with the same courtesy. Around this time, I started texting my mom and asking if she was still in touch with Nancy. Mom still thought I was the same immature tomboy who left Washington, so she wasn't involved. Besides, by this time, Nancy had started dating a guy and moved to Ellensburg. Her mother simply did not interfere. I can't blame her. When I returned to Washington, I found a job in a garage and spent at least 3 out of 4 weekends driving an 18-wheeler truck on short hauls. That's exactly what I was doing the day I walked into a diner near Vantage. Now I know where Nancy works. What should I do next? I stopped by the cafe on Sunday evening on my way back to the west side. Nancy wasn't working, but I got a nice piece of apple pie and a hint about when she'd be working again from the nice girl who was waiting tables that night. With this new information found, I began to make my plans. The next Friday night, I sat in the same place at the counter. Nancy seemed less surprised to see me that evening. She seemed surprised by the bouquet of blue irises on the seat next to me. Doris said that last Sunday evening, some guy came to see me and asked about me. When she described this guy, I thought it might be you. This is for me. Did I remember correctly? It's been too many years since I brought you flowers. But I think that's what you carried that day in Vegas. I thought this only happened in movies, but when Nancy took the bouquet from my hands, half the diner burst into applause. Thank you, Jim. A tear welled up in each of her eyes, but she managed to brush them away. Could you talk to me this weekend? Anytime, anywhere. I close here at 11. Come, let's sit and talk. As I was leaving the diner, I turned around. I'm not the same guy anymore. Thank you, Nancy. I got out and drove to the observation deck over the Columbia River just to collect my thoughts. At 10 minutes to 11, I entered the diner's premises. The establishment was empty. Even the cook had gone home. Nancy closed the door behind me, and we began to sort things out. Nancy was finally able to start studying as a junior at CWU and received primary education. I was glad to know that Cliff, the guy she was dating, was now out of the picture. Jim, that was nice, but I need to go home and get some sleep. I worked 2 shifts on Fridays and Saturdays. Can we have dinner on Sunday? Yes, it would be nice. Nancy and I were sitting in a booth at the Palace Cafe in Ellensburg, one of the nicest establishments in this part of Washington. The driver from her house was calm, and Nancy struck up a conversation. I was so glad to hear that you returned safely from the army. Ginny Hansen told me you're back. During the first year of your absence, your mother and I spent several evenings together praying for your safety. I'm glad those prayers were answered. Is there a reason why you never answered my mother's letters? She truly considered you a daughter, and it broke her heart when she didn't receive any letters from you over the past few years. She even left a couple of messages on your answering machine because she said she didn't have a cell number. Nancy's face lost color. Cliff must have been intercepting letters and erasing messages. He was very jealous that I was married and wanted me to end my relationship with your mother. He said that it is harmful for a woman to be friends with her ex-husband's family. He was adamant that I stopped communicating with your mother. I was trying to start a new life with a new person, and at first I thought that I should obey his wishes. When I didn't hear anything from your mom, he said it was for the best, that she was just communicating with me to bring us back together. I decided that he was right, especially after she didn't call or write to me for several months. She used to remember birthdays so well and send cards. Cliff, that controlling asshole, made me believe the worst. Please tell your mom how sorry I am. I will, and I know she will be glad to know how you feel about her. You can probably expect a call shortly after I explain what happened. No, I'll call her tomorrow. This has been going on for too long. I miss her. Well, Cliff was right. Mom wants us to get back together. She was delighted that I met you and that you agreed to have dinner with me. But she also said she didn't want to play judge or pry into our affairs. While I was serving overseas, I asked her to contact you, but she refused, saying I had to do it myself. The problem was that I was too stupid and didn't know how to break the ice. By the time I was discharged, you were no longer there, and your mother said that you had moved in with another man. It's a pity that your mother didn't say anything. I still loved you back then, and I probably would have stopped seeing Cliff before it was too late. I caught the then in her phrase, back then I still loved you, and it hurt me. I kicked myself in the proverbial ass once again for being such a stupid piece of shit. The reason Mom didn't step in and give Nancy my message of love was good. She didn't trust me to follow through. Mom said, you already burned the poor girl once, and I will not participate in helping you burn her again. As far as she knew, I would have returned home from the service with some tramp and a ring on my hand. Mom didn't know that during these 3 years I was yearning for what I had lost. Dinner arrived and we settled on more worldly topics until dessert. So tell me about Cliff. Cliff Ray was another one of my big mistakes. She realized what she said and looked at me in horror. I am so sorry it didn't sound right. She lowered her eyes and her face turned red. I took her hands across the table. Everything is fine. I really ruined everything. You deserved better. But tell me about Cliff. Cliff seemed so nice at first. After our divorce, I didn't date for a few months. Then I dated a few normal guys, and then Cliff came along. He said all the right things. He was moving to Ellensburg, and I decided to leave Tacoma. We moved in together. Then the longer we were together, the more controlling he became. He would come into the diner and sit at the counter, watching what was happening. In the end, my boss banned him from coming on my shift. He said he was disturbing customers, which was probably true. My tip was half what it usually was when Cliff was there. As soon as Cliff was banned from coming, he accused my boss and me of sleeping together. From then on, everything went wrong. We broke up 6 months ago, but he's still around. Ellensburg is a small town, and it was hard. It's funny, I left you, but I didn't want you to leave. And 2 weeks later, you disappeared. I left Cliff and didn't want to see him anymore, but he keeps showing up again and again. I took Nancy home, kiss at her chastely goodnight, and we made an appointment for the following Sunday. Nancy must have called Mom on Monday morning, because I received an excited call from Mom on Monday evening. Jim, I can't put into words how happy I am. I heard that your date yesterday went very well. I had such a nice conversation with Nancy today. Mom, I'm glad. No matter how things turn out, I hope you get back together again. Why do you keep being such a fool? Sometimes I think, oh, never mind. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Nancy still loves you. And if you get your head out of your ass you might have a chance to undo the stupidest thing you've ever done in your life." I was stunned not only by my mother's language, but also by what she had just said. "Do you really think so?" "Yes, son. This girl spoke on the phone today like a woman in love." "Don't screw it up this time." That's exactly what I did. I called Nancy that night and every night that week. I picked her up early Sunday morning, and we spent a great day fishing on the Columbia River. Sunday night, I cooked her a homemade steak dinner on the barbecue. We sat talking for several hours until it was time for me to go home. When I walked out to my pickup truck, I had 4 flat tires. Nancy and I stood on the road and looked at the flat tires. All 4 valve stems were cut off. "Forget about it, Jim. Do you think you can come to work later tomorrow?" "My first class is tomorrow at 10. Call AAA for early service and you can stay the night." I didn't argue. My mother knew what she was talking about. We entered her apartment. "Since you don't have to go home today, would you like a beer?" I wish I could. Nancy turned around and headed into the kitchen while I took off my shoes and sat on the living room couch. When she came back into the room, her left hand was holding my long neck beer, and her right hand was undoing the buttons on her sundress. She handed me the beer and undid the last button. The dress fell to the floor, leaving her in just her pink panties. Her body was even more perfect than when we were married. I sat frozen in place, enjoying her beauty. I must have worn her patience out, because before I could take a sip of the beer, Nancy snatched it from my hands, took a sip, and placed it on the end table. She sat on my lap, spreading my legs. "You say that you are no longer the same person I divorced. It would be better for you not to be, because I am no longer the mouse girl who allowed you to treat me like that. If you think that you can respect the woman who loves you and treat her as a partner, then hurry up and make love to me." I kissed her with all my heart. In all the years we were together before and during our marriage, I had never felt such passion. I think that kiss told both of us where this relationship could lead. We made love on the couch, then in her bed. I slept as well as I had not slept in many years. I woke up to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and bacon. Nancy was preparing breakfast, wearing only an apron, her cute ass on display. I grabbed her around the waist and kissed her neck. "Good morning, beauty." Nancy laughed. Never before has a man deflated all 4 tires just to find out if he can spend the night. I feel very special. You know, I would have done everything to make what happened happen, but I can't take credit for it. Suddenly, a worried look appeared on Nancy's face. "Cliff, remind me to thank him. Let's hope he's not hanging around this morning. He may be stupid." Fortunately, this did not happen. When AAA showed up at 8:30, Cliff was nowhere to be seen. They replaced the valves, filled the tires, and I was on my way when Nancy got ready to leave for class. I decided to give up trucking on the weekends. After all, I had a full-time job and needed to focus on getting back to Nancy. The following Saturday, I was sitting in a tavern waiting for Nancy's shift to end when Cliff walked in with 2 friends. They must have seen my pickup truck at the entrance, because as their eyes adjusted to the dim lighting in the bar, they spotted me and came over. All 3 took up threatening positions around me. I turned on my bar stool to face Cliff. Over Cliff's shoulder, I saw the bouncer at the door turn his attention to what was going in his bar. "Have you had problems with your car lately?" I couldn't stop laughing, and I kept laughing as I told Cliff, "You pathetic. I should thank you for what you did." That evening, I was about to get into my truck to head home. I wasn't looking forward to a long drive, but here I am, standing looking at 4 flat tires. I was going to call AAA, but Nancy told me to call in the morning. Then she took me to bed. This was our first time together after the divorce. Thanks, dumbass. I may have gone a little overboard because Cliff took a swing at me. Cliff ignored the bouncer, who noticed the growing argument. Just as I was leaning back to avoid Cliff's blow, the bouncer hit Cliff on the back of his right leg, and Cliff fell to his knees. The bouncer grabbed Cliff and pulled him out the door. Cliff's 2 friends followed him, but didn't try to interfere. Apparently, they had a few more brain cells than Cliff. The bouncer came back through the door and approached me. "Will I have any problems with you?" "It's unlikely. I'm going to finish my beer and go to my girlfriend." "Thanks for the help. I'm sure I could handle Cliffy, but 3-on-1 isn't my idea of a fair chance. Is there anything I can do to thank you?" I reached for my wallet to give him some bills. "Give a good tip to the bartender. At the end of the evening, we will split all the tips." Maybe you should save your ass. This guy looks stupid enough to be dangerous. There are some idiots who keep guns under the seats of their cars, just waiting for some stupid excuse to use them. Thank you for your wise words. I'll be careful. With that, I finished my beer and walked out the back door. I walked around the side of the building and looked around the parking lot. There was no sign of Cliff or his friends, so I got in the car and drove to Nancy's, just in case. It turned out that I was right. Cliff was at the diner causing a scene. I arrived just in time to see him grab Nancy by the shoulders and shake her. The cook and several customers were talking on their phones. Someone called 911. Someone filmed what was happening. I walked up to Cliff and pulled him back. He turned to me with fire in his eyes. Listen, Cliff, be a man. Let's go outside and talk one-on-one. Tell your friends to fuck off, and let's see what you can do. Come on, let's do this. Cliff looked like he was hesitating. He looked between me and his two friends, trying to make a decision. I kept pushing without humiliating myself too much. People were still filming it, and I didn't want to seem like the bad guy. Come on, Cliff. I know you want to take it out on someone, but you're too big a man to take it out on. Nancy, let's go outside and you will have a chance to show everyone that you are a man. This is your chance. Don't miss it. I didn't give Cliff time to think as I turned and walked out the door, standing in the parking lot. Now Cliff had to come out or lose face in front of his friends. It was not a fair fight. Luckily, Cliff's friends stayed away while we fought him. Cliff was a typical street fighter, but not a very good one. He tried to grab me a couple of times, but I made him pay for getting too close. He changed tactics by trying to kick me, but he wasn't very skilled in kung fu or what he was trying to do. After the second time, when I managed to grab his leg and throw him back, he tried to simply rush at me, waving his arms. For this attempt, he received a bloody nose. Give it up, Cliff. You tried hard, but it didn't work. You have proven that you are courageous enough to face me. That's all that could be expected. Cliff looked tired and seemed ready to try again, but then a police car pulled up. The policeman was smart and very decent. He didn't play Barney Fife. Instead, he found out both sides of the story, talked to a couple of random witnesses, and then watched some of the suggested videos. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate your attempt to calm the situation in the room, but I warn you that we do not want fistfights in the area and we do not want the situation to escalate. Mr. Ray, I can hold you accountable for what I see on this videotape. Ms. Davis is not pressing charges, and believe me, she could have. If she asked, I would take you into custody right now. Do you think you can forget all this nonsense? Go home and leave these people alone? Cliff was smart enough to agree with the deputy. He picked up his hat from the ground and drove off in his car. The deputy returned to Nancy and me. I wish I could do something more, but until Miss Davis is ready to sign a complaint against Mr. Ray, all I can do is warn him. It is worth considering getting a restraining order. Face it on what your cook told me about Mr. Ray's past harassment and what was on the 2 videotapes today. I don't think this will be a problem. Nancy replied, Thank you, officer. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll come by on Monday and sign it. Unfortunately, the situation worsened over the remaining weekend. On Sunday morning, we went fishing, and in the evening, we went for dinner. 2 couples approached our table and warned that Cliff had been seen in the city. He was threatening me in particular. There were rumors that Cliff was armed and dangerous. Maybe they were just rumors, but they still made us nervous. I'm not a coward. I have no problem going one-on-one in a fair fight, but the situation was getting out of... I knew how to use a gun, but I couldn't be with Nancy 24/7 if Cliff was going to be after her. Since I spent 3 years in the Army without taking my own life, could things really get so bad that I end up killing someone or being killed here at home? Nancy had the next week off because of spring break, and I still had to work, but she decided to spend the week at my home on the west side. That's when everything got better. Unbeknownst to me, while I was at work on Monday, Nancy went to visit my mother, and I later learned the further sequence of events. Nancy talked about what was happening with Cliff. Mom knew what to do. Do you know Cliff's family? Yeah, I met them 6 times when Cliff and I were dating. Do you have their phone number? Nancy found the number in her address book and gave it to her mother. Mom dialed the number, and on Monday afternoon, Mom and Nancy drove to Cliff's family in Kent. When I returned from work, Nancy did not say a word about anything, except that she was pleased to talk with our mother. This made me happy. On Wednesday evening, the phone rang. Without any introduction, the voice on the other end of the line started straight from the spot. It wasn't a friendly voice, but the words were music to my ears. I want you to know that it's over. I won't bother you or Nancy anymore. It took me a second to realize this. That's great, Cliff. I know we'll never be friends, but I appreciate it, and I thank you for calling to tell us about it. After that, there was a long silence. None of us knew what to say next. Cliff broke the silence. Okay, tell Nancy, please. I'll leave her alone. Tell her I'm sorry, too. She's a wonderful girl. He hung up. We found out that Cliff's mom and their pastor visited Cliff the day after my mom visited. Cliff's mother told him that she didn't raise him to be in prison, and that that's where he would be headed if he continued down this path. After the pastor said anything or not was not passed through the rumor mill, but whatever was said between the three of them had the desired effect. It also turned out that the rumor about Cliff carrying a gun was just a rumor started by some idiots who had no choice but to try to cause trouble. After that, we saw Cliff only once in the dance hall and did not pay attention to each other. When spring break ended, Nancy moved back to Tacoma to my mother's spare room. She said she would no longer live together and would only move in when she was Mrs. Peterson again. Nancy and I got married again. Scotty Johnson came to Washington with his girlfriend, a beautiful woman named Crystal, and acted as best man. Nancy asked my mom to be her maid of honor. It was a beautiful ceremony with 30 of our friends and family in attendance to celebrate with us. Sergeant Morales and his wife Kate were unable to make it to the wedding, but when our daughter, Robin, was born 16 months later, Ramon and Kate were back in Texas and agreed to be Robin's godparents. 2 years later, we had a boy. Nancy graduated from school and became a first-grade teacher. Her ability to love is amazing. She is a wonderful mother, a dedicated teacher, and despite all the time and energy spent on work or communicating with children, I never feel deprived of attention. I try to repay my good fortune by being a wonderful father to my 2 children and a wonderful husband to my wife. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.